Sahara dust carries radioactive particles to France. According to a recent discovery, when dust was recently entering the Sahara Desert over Europe, France received radioactivity derived from nuclear experiments 60 years ago, carried out in the Algerian desert. In the early days of February, a thick cloud of dust from the Sahara Desert covered part of Europe, changing the color of the sky and covering the surface with orange dust. Despite being an already common phenomenon, this event was somewhat abnormal due to the dimensions of this dust plume. Now, a recent discovery has identified yet another abnormality of that event. In France, one of the countries hardest hit by dust, the Association for the Control of Radioactivity in the West, ACRO, detected the presence of a radioactive component in the dust that hit the country. ACRO measured abnormal levels of cesium-137 in dust samples collected on 6 February in a car covered in dust in the Jura region, on the border with Switzerland. Cesium-137 is a radioactive component that is not present in nature and comes from the process of nuclear fission caused by a nuclear explosion. Its active life is long. Every 30 years this compound loses half of its radioactivity. After 7 cycles of 30 years it is expected that only 1% of its radioactivity remains. Another unusual event, snow had formed in the Sahara Desert earlier this year. ACRO estimates that 80,000 BQ per km2 of cesium-137 has fallen. It is a very low concentration that is not dangerous for health. What is surprising is the irony behind what happened. That's because these radioactive components are the result of nuclear tests carried out by France in the Algerian desert in the 1960s. So France would be getting back the radioactivity that it put in the Sahara Desert 60 years ago. On 13 February 1960, France carried out its first nuclear test in the Sahara, in the region of Reggane, Algeria, when the nuclear bomb exploded Gerboise Bleue, exposing its own soldiers and the local population to radiation. From that first test to the last one in 1996, France carried out more than 200 nuclear explosions, the majority in French Polynesia, but the first 17 were in the Algerian desert. As mentioned earlier, the arrival of dust plumes from the Sahara Desert is common in Europe, especially for Mediterranean countries. In the current season, at least 3 of these events have already taken place. The progress of these plumes of dust depends on the intensity and direction of the winds close to the surface, and at higher levels of the atmosphere, the high-level jets, which are responsible for this intercontinental transport. Currently, a new plume of dust is advancing across the Mediterranean and will reach countries like Spain, France, the United Kingdom and Germany. Therefore, in the coming days, orange landscapes like those recorded at the beginning of February may occur again.
Dust
Now, this is something you just don't see every day. Eerie orange skies over parts of southern Europe over the weekend. The pictures you see now are from France. Meteorologists say the vivid sunrises and sunsets appear to be caused by a huge swathe of dust and sand carried by the wind from Africa's Sahara Desert. Now, that is sure a long way to travel. It turns out this is actually quite a common occurrence. But the winds were particularly strong this time around, bringing more dust particles than usual to these skies over Europe. Now, this is something you just don't see every day.
from the Sahara Desert blown north by strong seasonal winds to France did not only bring stunning light and sunsets, it also carried abnormal levels of radiation. That's according to French NGO ACRO, Association for Control of Radioactivity in the West, which monitors levels of radiation. The radiation is not considered dangerous for human health, but it did arrive in France with a big dollop of irony. ACRO said it comes from nuclear tests carried out by France in the Algerian desert at the beginning of the 1960s, when the North African country was a French overseas territory. It claims a boomerang effect has brought back cesium-137, a product of nuclear fission created in nuclear explosions. ACRO said it did tests on recent Saharan dust that it collected in the area of Jura, near the French border with Switzerland. Considering homogeneous deposits in a wide area, based on this analytical result, ACRO estimates there was 80,000 BQ per km2 of cesium-137, it said in a statement. Red dust from Sahara turns Italian alpine villages orange. Sahara sand causes air pollution spike in Europe, turning skies and snow orange. This radioactive contamination, which comes from far away, 60 years after the nuclear explosions, reminds us of the perennial radioactive contamination in the Sahara, for which France is responsible, it added. Could radioactive desert dust be dangerous? If anybody knows Saharan dust well in Europe, it's scientists on the Canary Islands. From a lab at the University of Laguna, in Tenerife, Professor Pedro Salazar Carballo told Euronews. The dust of the Saharan Desert, or Calima as it is called in the Canary Islands, sometimes contains potassium-40, naturally present in minerals, and also cesium-137 from nuclear tests by the French government. His lab recently published a study about the levels of radiation present in the dust brought by the strong storms in 2020, which forced the closure of airports, keeping hundreds of tourists trapped. At that time, it found high levels of potassium-40 and cesium-137. Salazar Carballo insists these levels are safe, and the lab carries out constant monitoring of levels that are sent to the Nuclear Safety Council. It has never found alarming levels brought by storms, even having detected the Chernobyl and Fukushima incidents. What actually exposes us the most to radioactivity is the natural radon that emanates naturally from the soil itself, explains Salazar Carballo. It is estimated that between 5% and 14% of lung cancers are due to the radon gas that we breathe, especially in underground and closed spaces. Western Europe is currently in the midst of another Saharan dust episode, and there have been at least 3 this season. A fairly thick cloud is crossing the Mediterranean, covering parts of Spain, France, the UK, and Germany among others, where the phenomenon of mud rain is now expected. And as the storm affects the interior of Algeria again, it is likely that particles will carry back some cesium-137 from the site of the French nuclear test carried out on February 13, Ninette and 60. Codenamed Gerboise Bleue, that test and its remaining remnants, returning to France, could serve as a reminder of the persistent trace of atomic energy.
Sahara dust carries radioactive particles to France.